April 1116. A pregnant nun is dragged from her convent in Argentea. Her lover isn't a soldier. He isn't a nobleman. He's Peter Abelard, the most famous theologian in Paris. Within months, he is ambushed, overpowered in his own room, and castrated on the orders of her furious uncle. The evidence is not rumor. It comes from Abelard's own autobiography, Historia Calamitatum, the story of my misfortunes. How did Europe's most celebrated monk end up mutilated for love? And how many other vows were quietly broken behind monastery walls? According to Abelard's own writings, the letters of Héloïse preserved in medieval manuscripts, and collections like Epistolae duorum amantium, the letters of two lovers. This is the story of forbidden desire inside Europe's monasteries. Today you'll discover how one medieval nun described sexual longing in language more explicit than most modern romance novels. Why church officials repeatedly issued laws against monks and nuns sleeping together. And the disturbing reason historians now believe these isolated scandals were far more common than the church admitted. The letters survive. The court records survive. The papal decrees survive. Let's go. Peter Abelard was born in 1079 in Brittany. By 1115, he was the intellectual superstar of Paris. Students packed into the Cathedral School of Notre Dame to hear him debate logic and theology. He was brilliant. He was arrogant, and by his own admission, he was reckless. In Historia Calamitatum, written around 1132, Abelard confesses that when he met Héloïse, a young woman renowned for her scholarship in Latin, Greek, and Hebrew, he saw not just a student, but an opportunity. He writes, "I soon found her to be of such intelligence that she was outstanding in her knowledge of letters. So he moved into her uncle Fulbert's house under the pretense of tutoring her. And then, in Abelard's own words, under the pretext of study we gave ourselves up entirely to love." That line is not poetic invention. It's documented. Héloïse became pregnant. Abelard smuggled her out to Brittany, where she gave birth to a son named Astrolabe, a name confirmed in surviving correspondence. They secretly married. But Héloïse resisted the idea of marriage. In her later letters, she wrote that she preferred being his mistress to being his wife, arguing that marriage would damage his ecclesiastical career. Everyone missed this one detail. She understood the rules better than he did. Because clerical celibacy was tightening. Reform movements in the 11th century, especially under Pope Gregory VII, were aggressively policing sexual conduct among clergy. And then came the retaliation. Abelard writes that Fulbert hired men who broke into his chamber at night and castrated him. We don't have Fulbert's side. But we do have Abelard's own mutilated body entering monastic life at St. Denis shortly after. And Héloïse, she entered the convent at Argentea. That should have ended the story. It didn't. Years later, Héloïse read Abelard's Historia Calamitatum, and she wrote back. Her first surviving letter is preserved in multiple medieval manuscripts. In it, she does something almost unthinkable for a 12th century abbess. She says she still desires him. She writes, "The pleasures we shared have been too sweet. They cannot displease me." She confesses that even during Mass, erotic memories intruded. Even in sleep, the images of those pleasures do not leave me. This is not modern paraphrase. It is her recorded language. Yes, they had taken religious vows. Yes, she was now an abbess. But the official records show something else. Longing did not disappear with the veil. And this wasn't isolated. Church councils kept issuing bans. The Second Lateran Council in 1139 formally reinforced clerical celibacy and declared marriages of priests invalid. Why restate it? Because violations were persistent. Monastic rules, like the Benedictine rule, strictly forbade private contact between monks and nuns. Yet repeated legislation across the 12th and 13th centuries warns against dangerous familiarity. You don't outlaw what never happens. But a newly analyzed body of letters made the problem look much worse. In 1974, a manuscript in the Bodleian Library was closely re-examined by scholar Ewald Konsgen. It contained 113 Latin love letters between anonymous lovers, likely from the 12th century. Some historians, including Constant Muse in 1999, argued these might actually be early letters of Abelard and Héloïse. The debate continues. The attribution isn't settled, but the content is undeniable. The male writer calls the woman half of my soul. The woman responds with intellectual flirtation and erotic metaphor drawn from classical poetry and scripture. These weren't crude encounters. They were educated, literate, theological, and they were happening inside institutions built on celibacy. The darkest part is documented right here in Héloïse's own hand. After Abelard becomes abbot of St. Gildas, their letters shift. She no longer writes just as a lover. She writes as a spiritual leader responsible for nuns under her care. She asks him for a new monastic rule specifically designed for women. That request survives, but she also admits, I am guilty of hypocrisy. I seek in God what I once sought in you. We don't know what she was thinking in private moments beyond those lines. But we do know what she did next. She continued leading the Paraclete, the abbey Abelard founded for her around 1131. Under her administration, it flourished. Records show she secured property rights and financial stability. She did not collapse into scandal, she governed. Abelard, meanwhile, faced charges of heresy at the Council of Sens in 1141, condemned by Bernard of Clairvaux. His theological writings were attacked, not his sexual past. That's the twist. The Church punished his ideas more severely than his affair. He died in 1142 at the Priory of Saint Marcel. Héloïse died in 1164. They were buried together at the Paraclete, according to monastic records. Their remains were later transferred to Père Lachaise Cemetery in Paris in the early 19th century, a documented relocation during the Napoleonic era. Even in death, their love story refused containment. But Abelard and Héloïse are famous. Most were not. Court records from medieval England, preserved in episcopal registers, show priests disciplined for incontinence. The term appears repeatedly. In 14th century visitation records, bishops documented monks keeping women in nearby houses. In some cases, children are mentioned. This wasn't fantasy, it was paperwork. For centuries, the official story painted monastic desire as rare corruption, a few bad apples. But modern historians studying visitation records, penitential manuals, and canon law collections found something uncomfortable. Celibacy was aspirational. Enforcement was uneven. Historian Diane Elliott, in The Bride of Christ Goes to Hell, 2012, documents how church authorities increasingly sexualized and policed nuns' bodies from the 12th century onward, precisely because scandals kept erupting. Everyone assumed strict enclosure solved the issue. But the records show repeated warnings about monks entering nunneries and vice versa. And here's the irony. Some of the most passionate religious language of the Middle Ages, the bridal mysticism describing union with Christ, uses intensely erotic imagery. The Song of Songs was widely interpreted as an allegory of divine love. Bernard of Clairvaux preached 86 sermons on it. Desire wasn't erased. It was redirected. In that environment, the line between spiritual ecstasy and human longing could blur. That doesn't mean monasteries were dens of secret affairs. But it does mean this. The tension between vow and body was constant enough to leave a paper trail across centuries. And the letters prove that at least some monks and nuns crossed that line, not as caricatures, but as thinking, literate, emotionally complex people. After Héloïse's death in 1164, her reputation evolved. By the 13th century, she was remembered primarily as a learned abbess. By the 18th and 19th centuries, Romantic writers transformed her into a tragic heroine. But the primary sources remain stubborn. Her letters are not passive. They are intellectually sharp, emotionally raw, and theologically sophisticated. Today, historians still debate the authorship of the Epistolae duorum amantium. If proven definitively to be Abelard and Héloïse, They would push the timeline of their romance earlier and reveal even more explicit language exchanged before their scandal exploded. The broader legacy? Clerical celibacy remains mandatory in the Roman Catholic Latin Rite to this day. The medieval struggle between institutional discipline and human desire never fully disappeared. It was systematized. Here's the haunting detail. In one letter, Héloïse writes that she obeyed Abelard more out of love than obedience to God. We have the line. We have the ink. What we don't have is her final private prayer before she died in 1164. Did she regret? Did she still remember? The archives go silent. The sources are in the description. Fact, check me. This is real history, documented in letters they never meant for us to read. This is Blood and Empire. We'll see you in the next one.